I'm Ray Nelson. I was born and raised in the Crosby-Ironton area here and grew up luckily with a family that really respected, in particular, the Native American. I remember very vividly my dad telling me one time when I was watching TV, the cowboys and Indian shows and so forth, and shoot 'em down, all this sort of thing, and he kind of took me aside and said, "Son, what you're seeing on TV is not the real thing. Indian people are like you and me, and I want you to be growing up realizing that you talk to them with respect like you would anybody else." And that affected me in my life tremendously. And the same thing with my mother, who grew up near Fort Ripley, Camp Ripley East there, Highway 2, County Road 2. I can't think of the township.
What was her maiden name, Ray?
Kemp.
Kemp, okay.
Yep. And her neighbors were Thones,
Okay.
and her best friend was Alice Thone. And as a young girl, they had to go out in tents and sit in the prairie land out there and guard the sheep with dogs. And she relayed to me again, actually it was when my dad died and we were driving there just as a memory trip. She said, "Well, I remember when we were camping out in our tents and the Indian people would be walking between Crow Wing and Mille Lacs, and they'd stop by and they would give us food, and they were the nicest people in the world. And we didn't have any fears of them whatsoever." Oral history is something that's very important. That's why William Warren's book on the Ojibwe is part of my resource or background all the time to check into, because one of the major people that he talked to for information was Eski Baki Koze, or Flatmouth. And Flatmouth was born in 1774, and he died at 85 years old, I think, in 1860, I believe it was 60 or 61. And he's the only Minnesota native who's in the capital of our country, in Washington, D.C., a bus structure of Chief Flatmouth, 2 Indians in the whole United States, and he's one of them. But he told, according to what I've read from Schoolcraft, Zebulon Pike, anybody who visited with him, about how intelligent he was and perceptive he was of the white culture. He was like, read their minds and say, "I know what you want. You just want our land. You don't care. You just want our land. If you want us to move, get out of the way." So if it's something he said to Warren, and Warren wrote it in print, I believe it. Some sources you might be skeptical of, but after several people give you the same impression of a man, you believe if it's an oral history. Crow Wing is one of the most historic and most important sites in the state of Minnesota, in my opinion. And the reason I want to say that is it goes all the way back to the French, and in particular Radisson and Groseilliers, when they were the coup de bois coming, from Montreal and Quebec, and kind of had their first winter site somewhere near Chequamegon. Is that how it's? Chequamegon. I can't say it. But anyway, they had a wintering post there, and the Dakota Sioux people from this area, which apparently in the description had crow's wings somehow on their apparel, and through interpreters they were able to understand they came from a place where there's an island that they kind of talked about Raven's Wing, which was Crow Wing. So recorded history, as far as I know, that's the first time anybody wrote down that they were aware of Crow Wing. And Crow Wing is, of course, the Crow Wing River and Mississippi come together there where the island is. And in the old days, transportation was either on the river systems, by canoe, or you had to put your feet out in front of each other and walk in portage and things like that. And of course, obviously, canoeing was a little bit more of the better way to go and stay on the river systems. Now, one of the things that's changed dramatically in the whole area here that we're talking about is those little smaller streams, rivers, creeks that all connect to the Mississippi and the Crow Wing. when I was a kid, over 60 years ago now, I remember how very vividly how much water was flowing through them, especially in the springtime. And fish were spawning all the way from the Mississippi, all the way back into these swamps and so forth. The native people were well aware of that, because they had lived here many years before we ever arrived. And so they would walk, fish, canoe, paddle, whatever, for food sources. And particularly Crow Wing connected everybody with because of the life cycle that they lived for survival. And the game animals and so forth all had different habitat needs and areas. And right in that particular area is some biome changes that provided by nature itself. The prairies, the pines, the deciduous. And so when they were looking for game and protection in the wintertime from the cold climates, a lot of times they would paddle from their summer sources where they lived, where they would fish, pick berries, plant gardens, wild rice, and they would come to the Crow Wing area in particular. And they called it a place of separation, but it was also a place where they came together to hunt and develop a plan to go out into the prairies and live the winter. And at that time, of course, living in the winter, they had to be friends with the Dakota people. I'm talking about Ojibwe a lot right now, but the Dakota people lived here first. And the Ojibwe moved in with the influx of Europeans kind of nudging them along from the east and the different relationships that occurred at the time.